Hi, everybody, and welcome to my weekly cult situation report. I am Daniela, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership, and the author of Uncultured, that book you see right there about growing up in the religious cult Children of God before going into the cult of the U.S. Army. I have answered your prayers and gotten a new microphone, and you can see that Knitting Cult Puppy really wants to be in the video. So let's bring him up. Okay, here he is. Someone got all shaved. So now he looks like a dog with a 2 pound head on a tiny little body. But there he is. Okay, sit down, style. You gonna be cool? You gonna be cool? Okay, so every week I do a roll up on Friday of things going on in the world of cults and in my world of cults. And in my world of cults, things have been blowing up because it is a hell of a time to be an expert on the bad guy. This week, I have mostly been dealing with two things: Pete Hogsworth's Senate confirmation and realizing that there's like a panic going on the left right now. Like, kind of apocalypse level panic. People seem to be acting like the world is going to end on Monday. And so I have some things to say about that. Um, if you are expecting a book from me, I am getting it out to you. We had to do a whole new reprint, so they are on the way. And if you are interested in a signed copy of Uncultured, you can get that in the link in the description. And there seems to be this fear that the American military is going to turn their weapons on America. So I do want to talk about this a little bit as former Captain Mestenek in the United States Army. Um, so first of all, I've just been doing these kind of call them like America threat briefs. This was my job in the military as the intelligence officer, was to like look at all the information for every mission and then do two things: give a most likely course of action and a most dangerous course of action, so that then the planners can do their thing and get prepared. So I just first want to talk about how like apocalypticizing everything isn't helpful. Even if it immediately were going to turn into 1940s Germany on Monday, freaking out about it right now would not help that, right? And one of the things about when people go into, oh my God, the apocalypse is coming, we can see this in Uncultured in a chapter called Apocalypse Now, which centers around Y2K and like they want the world to end. Um, we see this when it's, oh my God, the robots are coming. So, CEOs don't have to prepare their workers for the actual changes that are coming, even if they do come from robots, right? So, this sort of apocalypticizing that is not helpful. Um, I do think that it is important to look at the comparisons between Trump and 1940s Germany, of course, right? And I focus on this a lot as a scholar of bad leadership. But I think what we're more likely to see is kind of more of the buffoonish mess that we saw last time. He's clearly putting very unqualified people into place. He's trying to break down social systems in America and government systems. And I think 4 years from now, will be looking a lot more like dictatorship era Brazil. Guest who grew up in Brazil recovering from dictatorship era, right? So a lot more stratification between the rich and the poor. Start seeing slum villages. They're already starting in Oregon. I'm sure Seattle will have them soon, California, Hawaii, and this stratification between the rich and the poor. One of the most shocking things to me when I moved here from Brazil when I was 14 was that you just have big 4 or 5 bedroom houses like on the sidewalk. You don't see that in Brazil. Everything's behind a commune wall that's topped with barbed wire or electric wire or guards outside, right? This increasing stratification between the rich and the poor. And then you see the breaking down of social systems, right? We're seeing it right now with USPS, right? They just want to drive that into the ground so that Bezos can buy it and become the world's first trillionaire, right? Which a bunch of these oligarchs want to do now. I think Biden is right to be warning us that like the oligarchy has arrived, right? And we need to be paying attention to the courts and to the things that he's trying. I also think that he's putting in so many incompetent people and also so many kind of fellow performative narcissists that it's just going to be kind of a bumblefudge up there. And of course, they only have slight majorities in everything, so the Democrats are still going to be able to put up a fight, and I hope they do, and I hope there's a lot of malicious compliance. Which brings me to the military. So, first of all, there's a lot of what is being said right now that is just wild bloviating on behalf of Trump. Just this wild sweep of the hand that you're going to replace all the generals and admirals with loyalists. First of all, there's almost 700 of those positions, all of whom have to be approved by Congress. And it takes 20 to 30 years to make a general for a reason, because you have to know how to drive the military machine. Something which Pete Hegseth, who was an 04 in the Navy, a major, compared to a general who's a 10, definitely does not know how to do. He was an 04 in the National Guard, which is pretty laughable to most of us. So speaking of him, he, very famously does not appreciate women in the military. Of course, Captain Daniela Mestenek was one of the first women on a deliberate ground combat team, on female engagement teams in 2011 in the Army. Marines beat us to it a little bit prior. And we have since then had a decade of women being integrated at all levels and performing very, very well. All of the arguments they do are tired and old. And actually, the first thing I did when I got to Harvard graduate program was wrote a paper called Nice Girls Don't Join the Army. And where I'm just systematically debunking their arguments, and I will put the link to that in the show notes, in the description. Okay, so all of his arguments are just so tired and awful, and of course he argues, famously that we shouldn't be, held to rules of war made by old men 80 years ago, but like he wants us to be held to a constitution built a long time ago, or maybe he doesn't, right? Maybe he wants to get rid of that too. But anyways, he very specifically wants the Geneva Conventions on Torture to be ignored so that he can do things like waterboarding or shooting people in the leg, right? This has become a big question I've been asked. So what's going to happen when Trump orders the military to go out and shoot people in the leg? Okay, so first of all, there's this thing called posse comitatus, which says the military cannot be used against the American people. It's one of the checks and balances, except for specific circumstances. This is when I also have to let you know that the National Guard is not normally part of the military, neither is the Coast Guard. When they are not federalized, the Coast Guard is part of the Department of Homeland Defense, and the National Guard is your state's well-regulated militia, and as such, they answer to the governor. And they are federalized under certain conditions. Many of them have deployed with us. That was one of the conditions. They'll be federalized and then they'll deploy with regular army. But when the National Guard is sent out, it is different. I also want to remind people that like the military, when it does get used, for example, with the response to Hurricane Katrina, the helicopters at least going in to do rescue missions took as much incoming fire, more incoming fire than during the initial invasion of Iraq. And nobody shot back at the American public. General Honore, in fact, got incredibly angry at troops just for pointing their weapons at the American people, right? And we are all trained from day one in the military, especially the officers, that you do not follow illegal and immoral orders, which means nobody has the authority to order the military to turn weapons on American people, right? Because that would be an immoral order. We are sworn to uphold the Constitution and to defend it against enemies, both foreign and domestic. So, Hegseth is very problematic, right? He's definitely a white nationalist. He belongs to the same extreme evangelical patriarchal church that Tia Levings came from. So if you read her book, that is hair raising. He of course has accusations of domestic abuse against him, which, by the way, if you're convicted of that, you can't carry a weapon according to the Lautenberg Amendment. Um, Something I used to have to brief troops about all of the time. Um, and I don't think he's going to be able to command very much respect, in fact, from all of the generals and admirals that will be working for him, from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Like, I kind of wish I could be a fly on that wall. And I think one of the reasons he's the candidate is because all the other generals and admirals turned him down, because every military leader who's worked with him has basically spoken out against him. And so that's one more thing. I am in the weird position this week of defending the military, but I do remind people that military leaders are amongst the few who have stood up to him all along the way. I do not think the American military wants to work for a dictatorship. I think that the Joint Chiefs of Staff have much more power over a democratically elected president than they do over a dictator. Um, and then a final thing is that, like, I don't even know if it's possible to run the American military by force. We have been a volunteer military for a long time. We take pride in that, and we build our structure like that. And, something else that kind of goes with this is that I don't think that civilians always realize how heavily technological modern war fighting is, right? So if just walking into a tactical operations center, like you can read about in Uncultured, like it's a little bit similar to just like walking into NASA and thinking you're going to be able to just like understand everything that's going on. So again, this kind of like concept that he's just going to replace them with who? With whom? Even if you bump all your loyalists up into job, you still need all of your soldiers to do your missions. If the military is just 20% down, you're not combat effective anymore. And 20% of the military these days is women. So I feel like we only need one or few more groups with us to not go along with it. And your unit is going to be combat ineffective, as they call it. Another thing I think people don't realize is that soldiers are not walking around in America armed almost ever. It's illegal to bring personal weapons onto bases unless you have like a whole list of very specific things. So usually they're only in your home or at a range. Um, and weapons are locked up in arms rooms separate from ammo. You have to go through a whole process to get to any of these things. It involves multiple humans being involved. This also applies to the president and the button, right? Like there's multiple human beings involved in this. One of the strengths that we have in America is, of course, checks and balances. And many of those checks and balances are just found in the amount of bureaucracy that is put into place. And bureaucracy is the opposite of charismatic leadership. A dictatorship, by the way, often charismatic leadership. Okay, so it's harder to get these things done. I think a lot can be done with malicious compliance, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes, right? The most dangerous course of action is, of course, he gets everything he wants and he is able to do all of these crazy things that he's saying. But I think a lot of it is performing for his fan base. And I think that the Democrats that are in our leadership are going to be able to throw a lot of sand in the gears, and at least get us to the midterm elections where hopefully people with more sense can take back over. What else, man? I've just been selling a lot of books because of Hegseth, which is lovely. And in fact, maybe we'll read that little portion of Uncultured. This is a section of Uncultured called Combat Barbie. Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, August 2011. After the mission that took the lives of so many of our guys, we wondered if missions with women would be put to an end, but the pace only increased. We spent time doing roadblocks and searches of the Bedouins in the surrounding areas, stopping vehicles of suspected smugglers, and visiting villages to hang out with the local leaders and their women and children, hoping to win over hearts and minds. A lot of our time was occupied patrolling all around the area surrounding Kandahar Airfield, outside the wire. All deliberate combat operations would now have women attached to them, the generals had decreed. Overhead, the noise from the two giant army helicopters was deafening, their rotors spinning in unison as they lifted off from the concrete landing pad. After the birds were gone, the absolute silence was worse, leaving me and 25 male colleagues alone outside an Afghan village. As the dust from the rotor wash settled, we all got up from our kneeling at the ready positions, and I looked around, on alert, squinting against the harsh glare of the desert sun. I saw the village about 500 yards in front of us. A single narrow path, the choke point, would make us targets if bad guys were around. As we crossed from the open desert into the center of the small town, Sergeant John McGregor, promoted after his role in the rescues missions that tragic day 3 months prior, pointed out that the rains from the night before had caved in part of the path. We needed to be on our guard. The guys got this, I told myself. They know what they're doing. We assumed our practice patrol position and began to march forward. Our intelligence briefs told us there wasn't supposed to be much danger, but nobody on this team took anything for granted. I eyed First Lieutenant Andy Wang, the new platoon leader who'd been brought in to replace John, and felt grateful he didn't look nervous. I settled my face, careful not to show any emotion in front of the guys. I clicked into being Combat Barbie, a slur some male soldiers hurled at us women who dared to play their game. But we leaned in and decided to claim the term with pride. Combat Barbie was perfect, professional, and proudly serving. So what if she was pretty too? We moved ahead slow and steady. Out in the open country of Afghanistan, it took us nearly 4 times as long to cover ground as it did during training drills because we never knew what part of the road would be rigged with bombs or which rocks might hide snipers. That's asymmetrical warfare and what fighting terrorists is like. If it were a chess game, the Americans would be just moves away from a checkmate when the insurgents doused the board in gasoline and lighted a blaze. Winning, but not by any of the rules the rest of us have agreed to play by. It's hard to replicate scenarios in training because the fear, the almost buzzing alertness of being out in their sand is impossible to mimic. I didn't think my constant fear could be heightened any more than it already was. But with each step toward the village, my heart tightened, and I battled my mind, whispering a barrage of unhelpful questions. Would this be my last day on Earth? Or maybe the day I lost a limb? Or 3? From the back of the patrol, I could see First Lieutenant Wang up front put his arm in the air, a hard, closed fist. That was our signal to stop dead in our tracks. It was too dangerous to move. We'd barely been on the ground for a couple of minutes, but already something was wrong. The explosive device technician near me carried a radio to communicate with his partner up front. I heard the warning crackle. We're picking up something, but we'll need some time to verify. Move slowly. Everybody be on their guard. Fear gripped me, and I could feel my body threatening to flare into fight or flight mode. But my training kicked in, and I forced my rational brain to take control. The guys with the right machines, the ones that detect bombs, were up front and on alert. I reminded myself that I was mostly safe, that what I was feeling was a physiological response to fear, one that kept me aware and alert when helpful, but could turn to panic if I let it. I would not let it. This was just an Afghan village after all, one we'd been to before. Nothing to worry about. But something was wrong. I could feel it niggling on the tip of my consciousness, and my brain spun hard as I tried to puzzle it out. War is like chess, except with real consequences. As I was the only woman on the team, John and then his replacements always encouraged me to speak up and speak out. But I needed something more to go on than my spidey sense tingling. Then it hit me. Where were all the children? Usually they were swarming out of the village, racing toward the helicopters as fast as their little feet could carry them. Where were the 6-year-old girls toting baby siblings on their hips as I'd done so often as a child? Where were the boys with their slingshots made from sticks, always scaling nearby rocks and cliffs, as nimble as the mountain goats they ran around with? Where were the children with the bright reddish-purple hair that I had thought was dyed, until I learned that it is a phenomenon found only in the deserts of Afghanistan, some DNA leftover of Genghis Khan, or so the legend goes. In the back of my mind, I scrambled to connect the dots. I was an intelligence officer, even though I was playing infantry at the moment. I knew the answer was somewhere in my brain, but I couldn't think of it. Suddenly, like the flash of a bomb, there it was. Stop, I said, with a certainty I didn't know I had. Doubt crept in. What if I wasn't supposed to be doing anything, noticing anything, saying anything? What if no one wanted to hear my thoughts? I was just there to engage with the women and children, the ones so blatantly absent. I shifted my weight and stared ahead at the endless miles of sand, reeling myself for the criticism and ridicule as everyone looked my way. Stealing myself. I knew that I'd never live it down if I was wrong. There are no children, I told First Lieutenant Wang. Anywhere. I gesticulated around, stared at the raised eyebrow on the lieutenant, trying to read his expression. I hoped he didn't think I was trying to step on his authority. But then both his eyes widened. Everyone, hit the ground, he yelled. That was the moment I knew for sure that I wasn't wrong. The men hadn't seen it, at least not all of it. The experienced group of airborne Ranger qualified pathfinders and explosive device experts, men who did this day and night without rest, men who had been primed, who had already noticed several other indicators that could have been nothing, or could have been an ambush waiting to take 10 more of us to early graves. The children were the last piece of the puzzle, an obvious sign once combined with everything else, and one I always briefed troops about in my day job. It had only ever been in theory before, but now the reality of their complete and utter absence hit me with fear that left my hands and feet tingling. It would take 20 minutes for the explosive device technicians to verify the bomb, in a spot they'd identified about 100 yards in front of our group. It looked pretty small, but still deadly. We wouldn't continue on the mission. Clearly, drinking tea with these village leaders would have to wait. We'd call in the suspected IED grid marker, and base operations would send a team over to deal with it more officially. By later that afternoon, the children would probably be back outside. We'd never find out if it had been a terrorist who had booby-trapped the village, or if one of the men we'd had tea with the last time we were here had been paid to lay the bomb. Maybe it was someone who'd had his children's lives threatened if he didn't cooperate. The Afghan villagers may have been ambivalent about American soldiers in their country. They may have wavered between supporting us or helping clothe and feed the terrorists who tried to take our lives, depending on whose mission they related to more. But one fact didn't change. They loved their children as much as any other parents anywhere in the world. If they know something is wrong, they won't let the children out to play. I'd briefed this to teams of soldiers going out beyond the wire. We called them indicators, signs of danger. I realized the reason why I noticed this indicator. I loved seeing the little girls. I felt flattered they could always tell I was a woman, even in my full combat kit. The ill-fitting body armor, helmet, and bulletproof eye protection, loaded M4 rifle, and 6 extra 30-round magazines clipped to my load-bearing vest, gloved and booted. And as much as I stood out to them, they stood out to me, too. Most soldiers on my team would try to win their favor with beanie babies and candy. The guys talked about the joy of making them smile, though I'm sure our commanders didn't mind whatever positive influence may have been gained with their parents by the gesture. But I saw more than kids happy to see American saviors. I saw a version of the childhood I'd survived. Hungry faces wearing brave smiles, calloused bare feet, and the fear hiding behind their eyes. That day on the sand, I didn't see girls laden with too much responsibility, along with the toddlers and babies they struggled to balance. That day on the sand, I saw their absence instead. I can't say for sure what anyone else experienced. All I know is that when we were walking back to the helicopters, mission aborted, but no casualties this time, First Lieutenant Wang said to me, "Man, I love having you girls on the team. You notice the silliest things. But he didn't say it like it was silly. His face didn't crack a smile at all. Just a silent nod, and he was off. A sign from a quiet professional. Keep doing good work. You're a valued part of this team. On the birds taking us back to relative safety, all I could think of were the many people who'd said to me, Daniela, I'm so glad you weren't there, the day John had died. But what if I had been there? What if any of us had been there? The women our country so strongly believed needed to be kept out of harm's way. What if, as John had once pointed out, our being so different with such divergent life experiences and all the silly little things we notice was the entire point? What if we could save lives just by being women? What if I could have saved him? Okay, so all of us, this leads now to the inauguration, right? And we basically now have MAGA, this cult that has been being built for 50 years since the Reagan administration, now taking power in America. And cults have always been out for political power. The National Prayer Breakfast is run by a cult. The Moonies own the Epic Times, and Trump spoke at their conference in 2021, right? Like these things have always been mixed together. The Children of God religious sex cult sang twice at the White House and once for the president of Brazil, and wrote apparently a marching song for the Philippine army under the dictator Marcos that was played every hour on national television. So, there's that for a fun fact. All right, so MAGA definitely fits the definition of a cult, right? You know, we all know the charismatic leader, Trump, is the last thing that they added, but we've got all of my things. We've got the sacred assumption we are right. We are going to make America great again, which, of course, is the transcendent mission. Make America great again, bring us back to a time when straight white men were in charge and everything was easiest for them and theocracy. And here we go. This mission, of course, requires the self sacrifice of members all of the time. It starts pulling them into isolation. And of course, as I've been writing about in the isolation chapter that I am doing a second go through now in Culting of America, like social media and what is called algorithmic radicalization has really contributed to isolation or insulation from the world, right? We are only seeing things that echo into our own silos. President Obama, in his last speech in office, told us to be careful of the silos that Americans are finding us in, ourselves in. And now President Biden just correctly named the oligarchy is here. So here we go, right? Along with isolation, you have distinguishable vernacular. Oh, it's been so fun ever since I have purple hair because they can't stop themselves. Oh, the knitting and the blue hair. It's just perfect. So funny. Okay, distinguishable vernacular. Us versus them mentality, quite obviously. What comes next? High exit costs, I think. Oh no, exploitation of labor is what comes after step 8. We're seeing that in the whole country. Of course, look at Elon Musk and his Doge telling people to not even bother to apply unless they're willing to work 80 plus hours a week. Cults are always about labor. You have very, very high exit costs, but high entrance costs too. You lose a lot to join cults. And finally, us versus them mentality, ends justifies the means mentality. And I also say to people, like, this is not the time to be trying to convert the MAGA people in your life. Like, this is their apocalypse. It has happened. They are taking power. They are so happy right now. But I think it's going to burn out quickly. So that's the hope. So we really need to be putting our energy into what matters right now, and especially like figuring out how we are going to protect all of the people who are going to be the first ones that they are going to come for. All of the marginalized people. And Hegseth can bleep right off. Okay, we have the big fires in Los Angeles right now, which we've had the discussion about them using prisoners to fight fires, which again is a whole rabbit hole that is very important, I think, on use of labor and how we just have free access to prison labor, which has just, then there's I'm not going to be the best one to talk about this, obviously, but like the prison industrial complex these days is just modern day slavery in so many ways. And it is definitely wrong. Being in prison is like being in a total institution, or is a kind of total institution, thus making it cult like from the start. Of course, it's crazy to have people out there being forced to sacrifice their lives to fight these fires. But something else, oh, and people maybe don't know this, but the military is often used to fight fires, and to do things like rescue. So when Mr. Knitting Coat Lady lived in Alaska, he flew that helicopter, or I think it was the crew chief on that helicopter that would fly out to rescue people on the mountains all the time. And then as helicopter pilots, our unit was used a lot to go fight wildfires. And again, I remind you, military helicopters and stuff like that are not armed when they go out in America. Okay. So, but also, very many grifters will show up, right? Anytime you have a space of personal transformation, be that good or bad, like losing your home in any way, even just moving, right? Predators will show up there. Emotional grifters will show up there. So this is definitely something to be careful about. Like the unqualified roofers that flock to the Gulf Coast every time there's a hurricane, right? Cheating, lying, cult like stuff going on is going to be everywhere. Um, and cults pop up in times of social turmoil. They always do. And what we are living through right now is times of social turmoil. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the concept of moral injury. And we have a lot of this going on in regards to military, a lot of people deconstructing. I feel much different even about that part that I read these days than I did 3 years ago when I wrote it. A lot of us are dealing with the fact that we were maybe sent into war under false pretenses and bought a lot of the propaganda that was being given out. We see moral injury in cult survivors of all kinds because every adult in the cult is a perpetrator ultimately. We all have to participate in these purity requirements, black and white requirements. We all have to participate in self policing and peer policing, a thing called performative regulation. And this is why Dr. Yanya Lalich says that all cult survivors or cult members, all adult cult members, eventually are perpetrators on each other. Want to tie this into Cult Book Club because we read a lot of stories, memoirs of different cult joiners. We just did Sarah Edmondson's Scarred last month, and in the month of March, we're going to be doing Mike Rinder's book about Scientology. Mike Rinder unfortunately just passed away. And he was in the phase of his life where he was really trying to make amends after being, spending his entire life in Scientology and being a high level leader. Um, Thanks so much for hanging out with us today. Definitely check out podcast Cults and the Culting of America, which is kind of like my channel, but with guests on. And we recently did a episode with Tia Levings of A Well-Trained Wife, and we did another episode with another couple from Shiny Happy People that will be coming out soon. You can find the podcasts on Cults and Culting of America on Spotify, iTunes. You can also watch the video on YouTube if that's where you're seeing this, or in our Patreon. All the links are in the description. And I have another podcast called Hey White Women that is me and White Woman Whisperer getting together. It's a friendly crochet circle while we deconstruct white supremacy like the cult that it is. Check out our podcast. And now for some nitpicking. First, of course, I'm going to show you this lovely dress that I'm wearing. This is one of my rich lady dresses. So I took this regular A-line dress that I wore for my book launch, and I added some really fun, funky sleeves. I recently invented earrings. Usually I make them on bigger ones, but you see these little ones that I did. I brought some earrings and my headbands to show off. So these are some of my bigger circular logic earrings. These ones are so lover coated. Everyone loves these ones and also thinks they look like fuzzy handcuffs. And then I made the thought-stopping cliche headbands that go along with it. Oh, so cute. That's mostly what I have to show this week, but this jacket I've been knitting right now will be gone and sent off before next week's, so I am going to show you right now. Okay, so this is one of my cult coats that I'm making for Lizzie, my talent manager, and it goes on like this. I know it all matches. And I'm making the final sleeve, and that's how it looks. And I hope you've enjoyed a cult situation report. Please like and subscribe. If TikTok does go away this weekend, you'll be seeing me here a lot more. But either way, follow me on all the things. Definitely come check out the Patreon also, where you can listen to Un-American, my video book of my second memoir that I wrote. So if you've listened to or read Uncultured and you just need more before Culting of America comes out, you can find that there as a video book. Thanks so much for hanging out. Have a day. Captain Mestenek out.